Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim, here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. I hope everybody out there who's listening, I hope they're doing just as fantastic. We got a regular guest, Tim. We have cast out our line and lured in this fantastic human being, a wealth of knowledge, again, devastatingly handsome, and cannot wait for the listeners to experience the topic which we are discussing today. But Tim, let's discuss how you are. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. And yes, I am really excited to interview our guest today, who is a former prosecutor and new author of the wonderful book. It's called The Book of Murder, A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death. And this is Matt Murphy. And Matt Murphy joined us for an interview on our other show, Crawlspace, recently to speak about his book. And we spoke about Rodney Alcala. We spoke about the Dirty John case. And these are all cases that he's worked on personally in his work as a prosecutor at the Orange County District Attorney's Homicide Unit. And today, Lance, he's back to join us on Missing to speak about the Brian Kohberger trial that is going to be coming up some point in early 2025.
And he does such a great job breaking this down and pulling it apart for people who aren't so caught up in the whole legalese of everything. And at the end of the conversation that we had with him last time, he had mentioned it. And he said, if you want to get together again, whatever you want to talk about, maybe Kohberger, I got a ton of stuff to say about him. And he does. And it's not like so dense. And I think that's why we have such a good time speaking with him, is because he can go on about the process and just keep you engaged the entire time. If you're trying to follow this or any of these true crime topics that we discuss, it's always good to have somebody like him guiding you along to give you the reasons why certain things happen and why certain things don't happen and why things are kept under gag orders, etc. So super educational and informative conversation coming up.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, as part of being a prosecutor, I guess he's speaking with juries and he's got to be clear, right? And man, is he clear in the way he speaks about these cases. And, you know, we just love it here. And Lance, just wanted to mention this Brian Kohberger trial, of course, stems from the murders. It was a quadruple murder in which Kohberger allegedly went into this residence in Moscow, Idaho in 2022, in November of 2022. And he murdered Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. And very tragic case. And Kohberger, the alleged suspect, is on trial, and he's actually facing the death penalty, which we do speak about with Matt.
And Tim, you mentioned that Matt Murphy is a new author, and the book is called Book of Murder. He also does the audio version, which is excellent. He actually narrates the audio version, and you can pick up and learn more about him and that book at the website bookofmurder.com.
And you can also check out Matt's personal site at mattmurphylaw.com. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We are going to be back at the end of this interview for final thoughts.
And in the meantime, we're going to take a quick break for commercial, and we will be back with Matt Murphy to discuss the trial of Brian Kohberger.
Welcome back to the show, Matt Murphy. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. We had spoken really recently about your excellent book, The Book of Murder, which if those out there who have not purchased this book, whether it's the audio version or the print version, we can't recommend it high enough. But you came on and you talked about that. You talked about some cases in there. You know, typically, I got to say, we don't have people back on the show that are more handsome than Tim and myself. But in this case, we just had to have you back on just to confirm that that wasn't a fluke the first time.
Yeah, well, after my week that I just told you about, I am beat down. So I think you guys, you get the gold and silver today. I'm happy with the bronze.
If this is you beat down, then
Thank
I
you.
want to get beat down every day.
Nice of you to say. I just got back late last night on a flight from St. Lucia, of all places. So, yeah, got to go down there and do a little scuba diving.
Very cool. And you also just participated in the crime cruise. Can you tell us how that was?
Yeah. So it was Royal Caribbean. The Crime Con put together this thing on basically about 400 crime cruisers, they call themselves, and they go on a cruise. And it was me, Chris Hansen, Paul Holes, and a bunch of other like people that are in the criminal prosecution / investigation forensic world. And we gave a bunch of presentations. I gave a presentation on one of my serial killers that I didn't talk about in the book. Hopefully it's going to framework for the next book. If Disney will give me another book deal. It's really fun. It went to Haiti of all places. Royal Caribbean owns like part of a peninsula there in like a remote part of Haiti where none of the issues or problems are. And they cruise in there. And it was a really good time. A lot of really nice people show up to these CrimeCon events, and this was no exception. So CrimeCon is run by Chris and Kevin Balfe, who basically organized the whole thing. And Kelly McClear works with them, and she's the most organized person in the world. And she's one of the many women in my life that I've just surrendered to the idea. I just have to do what she tells me. She's like, we need you on the cruise, so you're flying to Miami on this date. And it was a blast. Really good time, but I ate way too much food. So. And
when you boarded the cruise vessel, were you telling the organizers that it would be much easier if you were to be rowed out to this vessel in a dinghy, specifically the Crawlspace podcast dinghy?
I did not know that was available to me.
It's not yet. We've been trying to get this going for years.
We could have attached it to the stern and just dragged it around the Caribbean for that trip. Yep. Although it was pretty rough, surprisingly. And I do a surf trip with my buddies every year. We're on a boat, and I do these liveaboard dive trips, which are super fun. But it was stormy, and those cruise ships don't even feel it. I mean, literally, it's like big giant waves outside. The boat is barely even rocking. They're so freakishly well stabilized. So it was a great time.
Very cool. And I think me joking around in the beginning of this episode is mostly my anticipation for the topic that we're going to discuss, because the topic is so serious. And you had brought it up. I can't remember if you did it while we were recording last time, but you had said, hey, let's get back on. And if you want to talk about this or Kohberger, let's talk about it. And you had said Kohberger, and we really hadn't done an in-depth episode since it happened initially. And this happened, it's going to be 2 years tomorrow. And I didn't realize that it's going to be 2 years tomorrow, November 13th. And now you brought it up the last time, and here we are, and it is a super heavy topic. But anyway, let's go back a little bit. For people who don't know who you are, can you fill us in a little brief bio on Matt Murphy?
Sure. So I'm a California kid, grew up in LA, went to Santa Barbara for undergrad, San Diego for law school, and then I was a deputy DA in Orange County, California for 26 years. I spent 21 of those working exclusively in the sexual assault unit and then the homicide unit. So I spent 17 years in homicide. Orange County is a vertical system. So what that means is you get assigned certain cities, and you're responsible for that. And then you start the night of the murder. So I had the cities of Costa Mesa, Laguna Beach, Newport Beach, and Irvine. And for 17 years, when any murder happened in those cities, I would roll out with my investigator, meet detectives in the middle of the night oftentimes, go through the warrants, and you work the case all the way up, which is different than the typical assembly line model that most DA's offices use, where like the police investigate on their own, then they bring it to one deputy DA to review it for filing. Somebody else does the preliminary hearing. Eventually, somewhere way down the chain, it winds up on a trial attorney's desk who will go in and try the case. So Orange County is different. It was considered an elite unit. There was 8 of us out of a population of about 3 million people in Orange County. And we split up the county between us. And handled all the murders. So you basically start on the ground floor, and then you do every aspect of the prosecution, from signing the warrants the night of all the way through sentencing at the end. And while I was there, I did some pretty high-profile cases. I had Dirty John was one of mine. I did the Golden State Killer. I had the dating game killer, Rodney Alcala, that's now on. It's a new, it's a hit. Anna Kendrick made a movie out of that case, and it's one of the chapters in my book. People really, it's doing well. So your viewers might really like it. That's I guess that's who I am. I left in 2019, signed a deal with ABC News. In fact, I guess I can announce it here first. I just this morning re-signed my contract with ABC, which is really cool. So I'm going to keep working for them for another year. I do a lot of commentary for 2020. I'm a legal analyst on the crime cases of the day. So when it comes to Kohberger, I'm pretty well versed in all that. I've done a bunch of commentary on it for various outlets, and just a fascinating case. I did a lot of cases like that. I tried 52 murders while I was in the homicide unit, or 52 trials while I was in the homicide unit. And not every one of those was a murder, but most of them were. So yeah, well versed in all that. It's capital case litigation before the Ninth Circuit. So because it's Idaho, that's the same federal circuit court that California goes to. So very familiar with the appellate scrutiny that's going to receive, and the issues and all that. So Kohberger is a fascinating case.
Wow. And I definitely want to get into it. But before we do, I do want to mention your book, The Book of Murder. I believe the first time we spoke with you was before the book was released. And I just want to give you a congrats on the book. It seems like everybody loves it. I love it. The audiobook version is narrated by you wonderfully. Can you just tell us how has the reaction been to your book?
It's been great, and it's been really humbling. So most importantly, from the victims' families that I worked with, everybody that's reached out to me, thank God, they appreciated it, and they were okay with everything I wrote. And then a lot of the people in there, like my old mentors and some of the people I worked with, they really liked it. And it sort of met the seal of approval from the people who taught me how to try murder cases and mentored me and advanced me through my career. So that was really awesome. And then it's got a 4.7 rating on Amazon right now, which is really cool. It's like I think 200 reviews, which is flattering and humbling at the same time. And it's been I've gotten to do a really cool little mini promotional tour. I got Anna Kendrick. She brought me in as a consultant on the movie, which was great. So I've gotten to do a little bit. I actually got to go to did an interview on the red carpet of the premiere, which was exciting for me because I grew up in LA. And she's wonderful, by the way. Anna Kendrick was awesome to deal with. Couldn't have been nicer. And I feel like I kind of made a friend out of that. And I've gotten to do a bunch of podcasts. Megan Kelly had me on hers. I'm going to do an interview tomorrow with Sunny Hosteen from The View. So kind of covering all ends of the political spectrum on that. And I did Dax Shepard, Armchair Expert, that hasn't come out yet. But so it's been really fun. I've gotten to meet a lot of really great people, interesting experience. And then, it's been well received, thank God. So, it's doing well. The Audible, I narrated it myself. And the magic of those people at Audible is they made my clunky narration actually sound pretty good, because I learned I write in tongue twisters because I could not get a sentence out. Like one of the lines was, I tried to say, Newport Beach is one of the most picturesque communities in California. And it's like 7 pickled peppers on a pipe, I couldn't say it. So a lot of the lines that I narrated were not exactly what was in the book because I couldn't say it. One of the most picturesque, I still can't say it. So anyway, I think I swapped it out for just, it's a very beautiful city, but they were really nice. Audible was nice, and it's been doing really well. So it's been number one in its category off and on since its release in the middle of September. So I'm really hoping that it's done well enough that Disney will give me another book deal. So hopefully fingers crossed. I got a proposal I'm about to send over to my agent soon. So next one's going to be about serial killers.
Very cool. Wow. Well, yes. Best of luck with that. I'm sure that's a slam dunk for your next book.
I hope so.
Yeah. You mentioned a line that you read and wrote, and I've got one here that I wrote down that stuck with me, and I wanted to ask you about it. Every entrance to a murder scene is like walking into the center of a three-dimensional puzzle, albeit a puzzle with dark emotional energy, sometimes still lingering in the air. Can you tell us about that feeling?
So yeah, it's a weird thing, and this is one of the things I've talked about with a bunch of detectives. There are most of the time, especially after you've done it for a while, you walk into a murder scene and there's just nothing there. Like you go in and there's some poor person that's been killed, but there's no great vibe in the air. Sometimes it's a bizarre thing. You walk into those scenes and it's almost like a silent echo, if that makes sense. Like you can feel it, that something enormous has happened. Like it's just a heaviness in the air that's difficult to describe. And it's only happened to me at a few of them, and I probably walked 100 homicide scenes over the course of my career. But my very first one, when I went in, I talk about this in the book a little bit. It's almost like, like a huge emotional bomb has gone off, and you can perceive it. And I've got some detectives who are really experienced in homicides will insist like, nah, nothing ever has been I've never felt a thing. And others are like, yeah, I've walked in and felt the same thing. And I even had one, and this is not in the book, but I had one out of a hotel, a very fancy hotel in Newport Beach. And it wound up not being a murder. It was an OD where this drug dealer from New Zealand, he put his girlfriend, she OD'd, and he put her body on ice, and he kept her in a cooler in this room for a year. And this is like with room service, and he had this suite at a really fancy hotel. And I show up right as, and cops are cops, right? They're in right under the surface, for the women and the men, there beats the heart of a 17-year-old kid because they all have just ridiculously funny senses of humor. But there was, a lot of these guys are also they're the guys that roll in with the balaclavas on that also work the SWAT unit, and they're the guys that are trained to fly in standing on the skids of helicopters with machine guns. It is a very sort of masculine profession, and no more so than the undercover narcs. Right. And I walked to the scene, and so this woman has been on ice for a year. This guy's paying a taxi driver to bring 100 pounds of dry ice to him every week. And so he gets busted for his dope deal, and they go into the room and they pop this cooler lid, and there's a dead body in it. And they have an officer assigned to the inside of that room. And I walk up, and it's Dave Byington, who's all over the place in my book. He's the detective sergeant. He was the lead on the De Leon case and also instrumental on the McLaughlin case. And this is a hard-hitting guy who's like, he's got biceps like this, and one of his undercover narcs guys. And I walk up, and he comes out of the room, and his eyes are white, and he's like, I'm not going back in there, Dave. And this is like a 250-pound gigantic undercover cop. So his hair's all, he looks like a Harley rider, like a motorcycle gangster. And he's like, I am not going back into that room. Shit is moving around in that room, and the air conditioning is off. He's like, it's freaking haunted. And so that you do encounter that sort of thing. And that was one of those scenes. It was friggin' weird. You walked in, and that wasn't even a murder, but her body had been discovered. And there was something about that scene where you could just feel it. And he was freaked out and he refused to go back into the room. That's very, very rare. I'll leave that cop's name out because he wouldn't want me talking about it. But it's a weird thing. And every one of them is a three-dimensional puzzle. Every case, sometimes it's two pieces, and the knucklehead is hiding in the bushes right down the street, which actually happened to me once. And sometimes it takes 15 years to put it together. And, I try to address that or take the reader through that a little bit in the book, the different kinds of murders, from child abuse to gang murders to conspiracies to kill for money, which are the most engaging, I think, because they always leave a false trail of evidence trying to get away with it. So each in the taxonomy of murder cases, each kind is fascinating in their own way, but they're all so different. And it takes, my old boss used to say it takes 5 years to get a handle on the different kinds of murders, so you're truly competent in the various types. Like a serial killer is totally different than a gang murder, or a plot for money, which is totally different than a 7-Eleven robbery gone wrong. So that was my problem. They were all so fascinating to me that I didn't want to leave. So I did 17 years.
Every time I see a book that has the narration done by the author, it's always sort of like a 50-50 shot that the author is going to be a good narrator. And there's no other person I could imagine narrating your book other than you, because every one of these cases, every one of these stories, it's so clear that you put like over 100% of yourself into it. And I don't think that would have come across if even a really good voice actor, you would know that voice actor is just doing an impersonation of you.
Thank you for saying that. It was like the behind the scenes on that. It took me 5 days. I think normally it takes about 3, but I was I had the hardest time reading my own stuff. I listened to it. They did such a good job of like editing it. It really masterful, and they were so nice at Audible. But in listening to it, I'm one of those that I can't stand the sound of my own voice. And, but I got through about 30 minutes of it, and I never realized that I truly have a Southern California accent. Like in my mind, I sound like Jeff Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Like I have that surfer like drawl, and it's sort of embarrassing, really, but the Audible is doing great. People really seem to like it. So thank you for saying that.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Okay, now I would love to talk about this Brian Kohberger and this upcoming trial. You mentioned different kinds of murders. Which does Kohberger's murders fall into?
Very squarely under the serial killer category. Okay, so one of the kind of bones I have to pick with the current definition on serial killers is the FBI definition is 2 or more victims committed by 2 or more unlawful killings committed by the same person at different events, that is impossibly broad, right? And the fact that we classify serial killers, we require that they kill 2 people in different events before they get the label, and it's an academic label, not a legal one. But when you think about that definition includes gang members who can shoot straight, or drug dealers who are in the game long enough, and get ripped off, or cartel hitmen, or mercy killings from medical personnel. Like I talk about that a little bit in the book, and what it doesn't include specifically are the guys that get caught after their first rodeo, the guy that gets caught after his first killing, who has all the drive, all the compulsion, all the desire to go and do it. But modern forensic science and police work has reached a level now that a lot of would-be serial killers who absolutely will do it again if they get out, they're caught after their first rape, or they're caught after their first murder. Kohberger, in my opinion, is exactly that guy. This has serial killer written all over it. And he just got caught after his first one because of a bunch of mistakes that he made, despite the fact that he was a PhD student in criminology, which I think is really interesting.
Okay, there's probably not many people out there listening who are unfamiliar with what happened 2 years ago tomorrow. Can you give us the background on the circumstances of these? I mean, what's the word, right? I can't even think of the word. Like, horrific is not strong enough, but
I would call this a slaughter, personally.
Slaughter. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is so essentially there's still information that we don't know. Okay. There's still things that have not, the court tamped down, and they put a gag order on everybody, and there's definitely information out there that will come out in the trial that we still don't know about. But what we do know publicly is you've got a guy named Brian Kohberger, who is a PhD student at a University of Washington, which is just over the border from this college where you have all these young students. So it's a 4-year school, and even though it's in a different state, it's about 20 minutes away. So you got 2 different universities right next to each other, and there just so happens to be a state line in the middle. So essentially, it appears that Brian Kohberger, I think that what's going to come out at trial is that he was probably obsessing over one of these young women that lived in this house together. And it's a typical college kind of setup. It's a bunch of roommates, a bunch of different rooms, and they're all young women, and they've all got, they're in various stages of boyfriends, or some of them are single, but they all live in this house. And they're all, typical American college students, which means they're partying on the weekends. And on a weekend night, these, they're young women, but these kids are so young. Every time I see their photos, I think girls, because they're just, they've just become the age of majority. They're all young college students, and each one of them has families that love them. So they are absolutely your typical, like everybody that we either went to college with and loved, or our family members that we know and love, or our friends. Like, it's all America college kids, getting degrees. And this guy, I think that he was probably really interested in one of them. And it's like the great philosopher Mike Tyson once said, everybody has a game plan until they get punched in the face, right? So he put together this plan that he was going to go in, perhaps just rape her, perhaps rape and kill her. And he went in with some sort of plan, and things went pear-shaped, as they say. And what I think he didn't anticipate is that, especially when they were partying, she would sleep, like her best friend would sleep in the same bed with her, like not sexually, but just there was 2 young women in college, and they'd go out, party, get drunk, and then one of them would fall asleep in the other one's bed. So he went in, and there were 2 of them in bed together. I think that was something he wasn't anticipating. They both woke up, and he brought a Marine Corps K-bar knife, which, for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Roman gladius, which is, basically was the weapon the Romans used to conquer the world, and the Marine Corps K-bar knife are probably the 2 most vicious stabbing instruments ever invented. Like, forget samurai swords and all that. Like, it is designed for one thing, and that is killing people. And so he went in with this really vicious knife, and he brought it in a sheath. And so he killed the 2 girls. One of them, one of her roommates, her boyfriend was spending the night, and he was a strapping athletic kid, and he came down probably to investigate the noise. And he turned the knife on him, and then probably, I think, followed him into the next room, where he immediately killed this girl, the girlfriend. Sorry. So he wound up killing these 4 college kids, and then walked out of the house. And there was sort of, infamously, there was one of the roommates who also had been partying all night, sees some man leaving with what appeared to be a mask on, which we've all gotten used to seeing after COVID, right? And sees him leave, especially 2 years ago. We all know what was going on then. And basically went back to bed. And so when police came in, they find these poor 4 dead murder victims, but they also found the sheath to this K-bar knife. And on the sheath, there's a snap to snap a little metal snap. They found Brian Kohberger's DNA on the snap, which is devastating evidence from a legal and factual standpoint, obviously. And then when they looked into, he had a car. It was a Hyundai, a particular model, of course, and they found multiple videotapes of this car driving around the house, driving in the area of the house, coming to and from the house, based on various security cameras that existed on the route in between where Kohberger lived at University of Washington and the murder scene. And then they got into his phone records, and they were able to establish that Brian Kohberger's cell phone was pinging, and it pinged multiple times around their house, around the place that they lived, in the weeks and days leading up to the murders, and also the night of the murder. And I've presented this kind of evidence in court before, where he is heading in the direction of the murder scene at a time, in the middle of the night, perfectly consistent with him being the killer and arriving at the scene, and that he turned his phone off, which is also incredibly powerful because the jury will be instructed as to consciousness of guilt, is what it's known as. So essentially, this guy's a PhD student. He's smart enough to know, hey, I probably don't want my cell phone pinging around the murder at the time of the murder, or around the rape at the time of the rape, whatever he intended to do when he went in. But he was not smart enough to realize that driving in the direction, he's hitting off cell phone transponders on his way there. And then he turned the phone back on before he got home. So they got him returning, totally consistent with him going in there and committing the murder. So the evidence here is, in my view, it's overwhelming. So they're seeking the death penalty, and it's known as a bifurcated trial in the Ninth Circuit. So California and Idaho law are virtually identical on this. So bifurcated means first there's a trial to determine whether or not there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Brian Kohberger is the killer. Then they will assess the aggravating versus mitigating factors to determine whether or not the most appropriate sentence is life without possibility of parole or death. Okay, and among the aggravating circumstances, the jury will be told that they can consider what's known as victim impact evidence, where the bereaved family members of these kids are going to be able to come into court and testify about how this impacted their lives. That is devastating evidence, and then they will weigh that against what are known as factors in mitigation, which is things like, was there a history between the person, the defendant, and the person they killed? Was there bad blood? Had the person abused them before? Was the defendant under the influence or direction of another person when they committed the crime? There's all these factors. Was the person under the influence of alcohol or drugs? And then in California, we have what's known as K-factor evidence, which is a catch-all provision that allows the deliberating jury to consider pretty much anything else that may be mitigating. So that the jury will see every photo of Brian Kohberger holding a puppy, every cute picture of him as a kid, and they will weigh that against the aggravating factors, which is the impact that this had on the families. And after that balancing act, if they determine, and the key term here is substantially, if the aggravating circumstances substantially outweigh the mitigating, then the jury will be entitled to, but won't be required to, return a verdict of death. So there was a recent development in this case where the defense brought a change of venue motion, where they asked to change this from, this is a place, it's called Moscow, Idaho, and basically take it out of the county that Moscow, Idaho is in because of the overwhelming media coverage, and move it to another county in Idaho. And the judge granted that. That ruffled a lot of feathers. I think the judge made exactly the right call on that, because the name of the game from the court's perspective is eliminating issues on appeal. Because if he's given the death penalty, and it should be this way, death penalty cases, especially in the Ninth Circuit, they receive the highest level of appellate scrutiny imaginable, as they should, because even in California, where the death penalty is still on the books, but it's essentially symbolic, but Idaho might actually execute. There's only 7 people on death row in the state of Idaho, and that may, it might actually happen. So the judge's job is to make sure that every point of fairness that can break towards the defendant, that he's given that over and over again. And it should be that way. You want to make sure that, the tie goes to the runner when you're talking about putting somebody to death. So you want to make sure the evidence is overwhelming, and you want to make sure that the aggravating circumstances are, substantially outweigh any factor on mitigation. I think all of those boxes are checked in this case. I think the evidence is overwhelming, and I think that when the jury is given these instructions, whether it's a jury in Moscow jurisdiction or Boise, wherever the case ultimately winds up. Right now, I think it's in the state seat. I think they're in the Boise County, wherever that is, and they're going to get a perfectly fair jury And I think if I had to call this one, if Vegas took bets on it, I think this jury is going to convict him, and I think they're going to come back with death. So I think that was a really good call by the judge, in my view.
Wow. So his DNA, Kohberger's DNA, was found on the sheath. What if that never happened? I'm not sure how much you know about the intricacies of their investigation, but how would they have gotten him otherwise?
If they had not found the DNA on this is a totally different case. So there is a thing that we call the CSI effect, because so many jurors are really attuned to, true crime, and there's been, so many TV shows that there's, the old TV show CSI. What happens is you find some piece of evidence, and Grisham, I think that's his name, pops it into a machine, and 30 seconds later, somebody's driver's license pops up, and and you go, to dramatic arrest and conviction in 42 minutes plus commercials. So the juries really kind of get used to this idea that everything is super cut and dry, and the brooding, crime scene analysis or analyst with their gun will solve the case, which makes for super entertaining TV. However, it's just not reality. So juries really want, especially on a death case, they want DNA. They really do. And especially before, juries want to get it right. Before they come back with a death verdict, they are going to want to make sure it's the right guy. So they would be reluctant in a case like this, I think, to come back with death. In fact, I think that if they didn't have DNA, my bet is the DA wouldn't have even sought death, because one of the factors that the jury is allowed to consider is what's known as lingering doubt. In other words, okay, you've convicted them, but if you have lingering doubt, even if it's, something short of reasonable doubt, if you have some lingering doubt, you can weigh that in. I think that would be a real factor to consider if they didn't have the DNA. That DNA puts Brian Kohberger at the scene. And the defense is the defense is doing their job, and they've done a good job of sort of pounding their chest and saying that's a transitory item. Somebody else could have brought it in there, and properly argued, it's the friggin' knife sheath, guys. It's like, that's the weapon came out of that, and Brian Kohberger was stupid enough to leave it there. So I think that those arguments will fall on deaf ears if the prosecution has any game at all, and I think they do. The jury they'll listen politely, and they will reject that. And I think the defense they've argued that very strongly already. But what's interesting about death cases is that, the defense has, if they go really hard on cockamamie theories to explain away evidence and really fight guilt in a case like this, what happens is they really can burn their credibility for the most important phase, especially in Idaho, and that's the penalty phase. It's like, so if you get up and you say, you come up with a lot of fanciful, ridiculous arguments like, somebody planted the knife sheath there, nobody's going to believe that. It's not a rational, I believe, it's not a rational argument to make in front of a jury. But when you come in with something about how the police wanted to frame him or whatever friggin' OJ defense they come up with, by the time the jury convicts, they've already rejected what the lawyer has said. So when the lawyer says, okay, erase, forget all that stuff I tried to sell you before, now let me tell you why my client shouldn't die for what he did, they're already halfway towards rejecting the argument, if that makes sense. So strategically, there's a lot that goes into these cases, and capital case litigation is a very specialized area of criminal law, and there just aren't that many people who have done them. Like in the entire state of Idaho, I think latest count was 7 people, like I mentioned, who were on death row. So that means that there's 7 of those currently, 7 defense lawyers maybe that have done a death case, and that's assuming that there isn't one that's done more than one. So it's a challenging thing, and defense lawyers go to seminars across the United States learning how to properly defend these things. And there are 3 main challenges on every appeal of a death penalty case in front of the Ninth Circuit that you see these over and over again. They will always accuse the judge of some sort of instructional error. They will always accuse the prosecutor of some sort of prosecutorial misconduct, and they will always accuse the defense lawyer of what is known as IAC, which stands for ineffective assistance of counsel. They will go and they will bash the defense lawyer for every mistake they possibly made in the trial, trying to say that on appeal, Brian Kohberger did not get proper representation because they made this mistake or that mistake, if that makes sense.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
I want to pivot back to the serial killer concept that you had brought up earlier. And the four young adults who were slaughtered in this house, it was Ethan, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Goncalves. And you had mentioned that he probably knew one of them, and that one was Kaylee, right?
I think it's Kaylee. I mean, based on everything that I've reviewed that's come out publicly before, that was her room that he went into first. So that makes the most sense. And it could be something completely different, but that really does seem to make the most sense. And there's been hints that he may have done some social media searches of her potentially. But again, we don't know exactly what evidence they have. That hasn't exactly what he did focusing on her. Didn't make it in any of the affidavits yet. And at least nothing that I've read from the court, the papers that have been filed so far. But that's sort of, there's some pretty good indications that he was keying in on her. So whether he's going in to rape her and murder her, whether he was going in just to rape her, just to kill her, but there's almost always a sexual component to these things, but not always. One of the operating theories that I've heard is that Kohberger was weirdly obsessed with this and wanted to see if he could get away with a murder because he was, this PhD student in criminology. And he wrote some interesting things in previous papers. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. He wrote a paper on, and I forget the exact topic, but it was something along the lines of, as his PhD thesis, like, could you get away with murder? That sort of thing. Like, it was suspiciously on topic with this. And I apologize, I can't remember what the exact topic was, but it was an eyebrow raiser. It was like, that's he wrote that ahead of time. It's interesting, that he would be keying in on that one thing. It's essentially like something along the lines of how to get away with murder,
Yeah, and we've seen serial killers who will target sex workers, people of lesser means, people who won't, quote, be missed, and it's more of a random base. If he had gotten away with this obviously wasn't random because he had targeted at least one person and had the intent to do something to this one person. If he had gotten away with this, would he have applied the same technique to the next victim?
Well, I sure think so. I mean, this rings every serial killer bell that that has developed in my head over the years. But there are certainly serial killers that do kill and they don't sexually abuse their victims. But I have a feeling. I mean, this is he's. I mean, you see those every once in a while with like people that murder homeless men. We had one of those in Orange County. And then there's some very famous serial killers that, I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer, there was a sexual component, but he was eating his victims, and then there's the famous example of, Buffalo Bill, who is based on a real person from Silence of the Lambs, where he wanted to metamorphosize and he was murdering women to take their skin. So there are some outliers. In the serial killer spectrum, I guess we could call it. But almost always there's a sexual component. They almost always achieve some sort of sexual gratification, which is one of the reasons why sex workers are targeted by so many of these guys, going all the way back to Jack the Ripper, because there is that sexual component to so many of these. And that's why there's so many similarities between serial rapists and serial murderers who also rape. It's basically the same guy, just one of them gets off on the killing in addition to just the infliction of fear and terror as they're doing the rapes. But a lot of times the serial rapists, they mean it. And, when the knife is to the throat, they really will kill if they don't get what they want. And we saw that with, the Golden State Killer case. He raped 67 women that we know of in Sacramento County alone, of all the places that guy lived, in addition to all the murders that he committed. I think serial killers are really an intriguing area of study. I really do. But Kohberger has, I think absolutely if he'd gotten away with this would not have been his first rodeo, especially if it was as awesome as he anticipated it would be. And the first question I would be asking if I was the prosecutor in that case is what was on his computer? We don't know that yet. But, now he had plenty of time to delete and erase and get rid of, machines, to cover his tracks. But I over and over again with these guys, when you get into their electronic devices, especially if you get into their porn stash, you see exactly what they're thinking. And a lot of times it's chilling. Unless he was able to successfully destroy or erase these things, a good forensic examiner can get into deleted files oftentimes. And most people don't know how to actually do a real deletion, especially if the FBI is involved. And as we know, the FBI, and this was a multi-state thing, but we don't know exactly what they've got. But I think that's probably going to tell us worlds about what's going on in Brian Kohberger's head.
In your experience, would you expect Kohberger to have researched other serial killers, or are you expecting more like what he's looking at? I don't know, some darker stuff.
Well, it could be either one, or it could be both. If he's researching serial killers, the defense will go, "Hey, he's a PhD student in criminology. What do you want?" Right? Or it could be totally sexual in nature. If they got into his computer and he didn't delete, if this is sort of your classic serial killer who's motivated by purient sexual desires, we could learn of some really dark stuff. But of course, we don't know yet. So it really could be either, or it could be neither. And every one of these guys is an individual, and they all have their own. Each case is a little different. But also there are broad patterns that you see over and over again, like trophy collection is something. It's almost like they go to school for it. They will oftentimes collect little keepsakes of their successful hunts. That's very common. Another thing that I encountered over and over again, and we saw the same thing with Ted Bundy, is a lot of times they want to represent themselves, which is great. It's like that psychopath personality. They oftentimes have, a classic thing. It's called the Hare Psychopathy Checklist, and it's Dr. Hare who developed this thing, like what to look for with psychopaths. And one of the classic symptoms is grandiosity, where they really believe they're the smartest, most handsome, best person. So I think it's a combination oftentimes where they really believe they're the smartest person in the courtroom, and also they can't resist the power of being able to, have subpoena power and decide who has to testify and put somebody in a stand and make them answer questions. And it's like they can't, it's like a siren song that they find it really hard to resist that. And fortunately, in my experience, whatever makes them, disconnected from humanity and having a soul that makes them want to do this thing in the first place also means they just can't read the room. So they cannot see what they can't feel that vibe from the jury that, when they're going down the wrong path. So they all tend to be really bad trial lawyers to boot, which we saw with Ted Bundy and Rodney Alcala, my dating game killer.
Did Kohberger want to defend himself?
I haven't heard anything about that on him, but it's just one of those trends that we see over and over again. And I don't know. I mean, we still got a long way before this thing actually goes. So I don't know. We'll see. It seems like his attorneys have pretty good client control, and it seems like he's sort of going along with their program. And it's certainly not all, but it's one of the common traits that you see over and over.
For sure. And we talk a lot about what was done wrong in the beginning stages of investigations a lot, but I'm curious, in your opinion, what was done right in the beginning stages of this investigation? Because that community was not expecting this.
No.
As any community probably is not expecting such a act of violence. What did they do right early on?
Well, one of the things they did right, which was, and this was good. They immediately went and looked at videos, because a lot of those security videos will loop over depending on who's subscribed to the cloud and how long they keep it. Like you're talking about almost every security camera. If you don't get to it within 30 days, you're going to lose that footage. And so that was one of the things that I high praise to the detectives who got those videos of his car. Okay, that is huge. I think that that the successful processing of that crime scene, also very well done. I mean, I think it's it's obvious that if you have a knife sheath there and these kids have all been killed with a knife, that they preserve that item of evidence and properly swab it. There's a thing in forensic science known as masking, which in a crime scene like this is really problematic oftentimes. And that is, when you have particularly bloody crime scenes, and this was certainly bloody. So when people are stabbed, they die of what's known as exsanguination, which is just a fancy word for bleeding to death. But when they're fighting, these tend to be incredibly bloody scenes. So you have 4 healthy young people that are fighting for their lives. This is going to be really, really bloody. So you always have the risk when you process a scene like this that you're going to get suspect DNA that will be overwhelmed by the blood at the scene. So it's a subtle thing, and it might appear obvious to everybody, but they did a very good job of making sure that no blood touched that knife sheath, because had it done that, the DNA from the victim's blood can overwhelm the trace amounts, because the equipment is now so sensitive that it will pick up massive amounts of the victim's DNA, and you won't be able to see the suspect in there. So that was a subtle moment of forensic professionalism that nobody really has talked about, that really made the difference. So oftentimes, guys, the unsung heroes in these cases are the crime lab personnel that make sure that item is properly processed and it's not cross-contaminated. And they did a really good job on that. And then I also think, finally, the way they went and they surveilled him. I didn't talk about this before. They monitored his drive across country with his father back to, and I forgot, was it Pennsylvania where he lived? Do you guys know?
Yeah.
Pennsylvania? Okay, so he went to Pennsylvania, and this is really interesting. This is one of those things that the jury is really going to put a lot of weight in, I think. Brian Kohberger was observed almost certainly on camera. Okay, I'm sure they taped it, coming out of his house and throwing garbage away in his neighbor's trash can. Because as a PhD student, he would know that that's abandonment. So you have no Fourth Amendment right to your trash. Once it's in a trash can, black letter law, been so for decades, you do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that, and the police can take it. The only reason why somebody's going to throw trash away in their neighbor's freaking trash can is because they are worried that the police will come and check your trash and find your DNA in it. And that's something that a PhD student who's been thinking this through, who knows he botched the crime scene, knows he left that knife sheath there and is worried about maybe leaving DNA on it. So that subtle little thing. So that's a home run investigation wise. And it's one of those things that a jury, juries, you can bring in forensic geneticists and talk about that. They're not experts in biochemistry. They're not experts in cell phone technology, but they are experts in human behavior. And that is weird. And that is something that they will be able to consider in that consciousness of guilt category. And also there's that video footage we all saw where Brian Kohberger got pulled over by the Highway Patrol. I forgot what state that was in, but we've seen that was released publicly. And the officer approached the window and was like, "Hey, you're following the car too closely." And he's got a look in his eyes. His eyes are bugged out. And that's the kind of stuff that can actually make a huge difference with juries, because that guy looks scared out of his mind. Like, do they know? Am I getting pulled over? Am I about to get taken into custody? But I think that him throwing away trash in the neighbors, that's so damning. I think that's one of the pieces of evidence almost nobody is talking about, and the jury, I guarantee, is going to afford that great weight in the guilt phase of this trial.
Wow, yeah, really well said. Interesting stuff. This has been a great conversation here today, Matt. I am curious though. Before we let you go, I believe they destroyed the house, right? Did they bulldozed the house?
They did. They did. So the house it belonged to the university, and I think this is not the fault of the police, and the defense stipulated to it. So also, I guess we can't blame the prosecution. The university wanted to destroy the house, and I cannot criticize them strongly enough for that. That was a stupid thing to do. They created an appellate issue, and it was some administrator who wanted to, I got to do air quotes here, they thought it'd be good for healing of the community, which, can I swear? Can I swear on your show? Is that okay? Just
Yes.
the most bullshit. Give me a break. Like, you could just see some academic going, "Oh, we need to heal," as if that would heal the community. And what it was incredibly distressful for the victims' families, because they know that created an appellate issue, and the defense is going to be accused of IAC, like we talked about, for okaying that. Now, they forensically processed it to death. They took all the photos you could want. I think that's going to be fine regarding the Ninth Circuit. I think they will say it's okay. However, why put the family through that? And it's a vanity project by that school, University of Idaho. Are you freaking kidding me? So somebody can go, "Oh, we want to heal." Like, F you. You owe it to those families, you owe it to the students to make sure the highest priority, and you owe it to Brian Kohberger, guys. Like, make sure that he has a fair trial. And if the jury wants to do a crime scene visit, we see those from time to time, and it's going to be an issue in the case. Why didn't the roommate wake up? Why didn't she stop the person? Why didn't she call the person? There's so many issues that could be resolved if the jury did a walkthrough of that potentially. And I guarantee the defense is going to bring a motion. Like we should have. It's going to become an issue, and for the university to do that was reckless. It was irresponsible and stupid. And I cannot criticize them strongly enough for that. And above all else, it created additional anxiety for the parents and families of those poor kids, and that makes it morally wrong on top of it. So hopefully, won't be a fatal issue, but it could be. And it's a bunch of people that have engaged. They're not lawyers. They've engaged in no capital case litigation. It was stupid. It was moronic, and I condemn them personally. Like everybody I know was like, that feels for those families, was tearing their clothes and gnashing their teeth at that decision. It was unnecessary, and it was a bad move, in my view.
Yeah, that's super frustrating, considering like the number of ways that they could heal as a community, that they could suggest for healing as a community, and they chose that absolutely like destructive way to heal as a community. So yeah, I hear the frustration there.
You know what? And if the university came in and said, "Hey, look, our margins are low, COVID, we need it to build a new place for rental property. Like, we need the income from those rooms." That, in my view, would make sense. It'd still be, for everything I just said, it still is a bad idea. But they want to build a friggin' park, so there's no economic purpose for doing this. They put on the record, we want to do this to build a park, like, and I don't know if they'll probably want to put a plaque in there in honor of the victims whose families they've dragged through broken glass by doing that. It's arrogant, it's unnecessary, and stupid.
And I just have one more quick question, if you have time.
Sure.
Why do these things take so long? Why does this happen 2 years ago and we're still not at some sort of trial?
Believe it or not, guys, this is proceeding at light speed for capital case litigation. I had my last death penalty case that I prosecuted. I think it took us 8 years to get it to trial. And the reason for that, again, with the Ninth Circuit, the defense kind of has an ace in their hand on these, and that is they have to answer ready. And when you have voluminous discovery, you have various defenses that you need to review, you have investigation. No judge wants to force a defense lawyer into trial if they say, "Hey, judge, I'm just not ready. I think I can be ready soon, but I'm not ready to roll." For a judge to say, "Yes, you are," means you're guaranteeing a huge IAC challenge during the appellate process. And no judge wants to do that, because on one hand, we want the families to get, to be able to hopefully get justice quickly. But we have to be fair to the criminal defendants too, and that's important to remember, that Brian Kohberger has sacrosanct constitutional rights, and the judge is certainly going to understand that. But the worst thing for a family on capital case litigation is for it to achieve that very high level of scrutiny, as they all should, only to have a real problem on the appellate record that the Ninth Circuit or the Idaho Supreme Court forces the case to be reversed and that's their job. You got to make sure that the constitutional rights of Kohberger were scrupulously honored, and so that's why these cases take so long, because a smart judge understands that, and the last thing they want is to put the victims' families through this whole nightmarish process again somewhere down the line. And I mean, Orange County, the bench, in my view, was very good about making sure that every rock got overturned by the defense team, and they were given every opportunity to build their defense. But oftentimes that takes 5, 6. I did one that took us, my Jason Balcom case. It was 10 years between. Now we hung the death phase on that. I think it was 11-1, and so we had to retry the penalty phase of that, and he got the death sentence. But it took us 10 years from his extradition from the state of Michigan to California to final verdict and sentencing. So the judges really want to be careful.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that answer, and thank you for coming on and really breaking down and opening up this again, absolutely horrific crime that we really hadn't got into too much until now. So this has been really great for us, and hopefully the listeners got a lot out of it.
Hey guys, I love Crawlspace. I'm a total true crime nerd in my own right, so I love the podcast, and I could talk to you guys for hours anytime. So let's talk about Gilgo Beach next time. Rex Heuermann in that case, because that one I'm.
See, you do this every time you come on. You're like, yeah, that's great, but I'm just going to cast this out. Here you go.
I'm happy to
Sounds
keep doing
great.
it. So.
Amazing. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Matt Murphy. We really appreciate your time here today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Okay, and we're back here after the interview with new author Matt Murphy. I really can't speak highly enough about his book. I think it is fantastic. And again, as we said in the intro, Matt is just so knowledgeable and can give this information to us laymen in a way that we can understand it. And it's really an impressive skill that he's got.
It certainly is. And I was just looking at my list of questions and notes that I was jotting down as we were speaking, and every answer he gives additionally answers like 2 or 3 more points or notes or questions that I have, because he's so clear and because he wants people to get all of the information. But he also adds things that you just really don't think about when you're approaching these cases, when you're looking into these stories. The first one being just the type of knife that Kohberger allegedly used. And when he mentions it, I do a quick Google search, and it's essentially the knife that you see in Rambo. And Matt says there's no other purpose for this knife other than for what it was just used for. That's something I never thought of. I never thought of the type of knife and the purpose that knife was even made. How did it's these little things that he adds that just bring so much like depth and texture to the conversation.
Yeah, and also about how the sheath was left and Kohberger's DNA was found on that sheath. And I liked it when he gave praise to the forensic team in Idaho to not have disturbed that DNA with the amount of blood at that scene. That was a nice nod of professionalism to them, but also frightening to think about. Had he actually taken that sheath, where would we be? Like, this guy might be out there and may have other victims at this point already.
Isn't that crazy to think? When he was talking about this, when Matt was talking about that, it's crazy to me to think that happened in 2022. There's video footage of this vehicle from numerous like Ring cameras and other CC recording devices that picked up this car, and even that wouldn't be enough to bring us to a point where they could have such a solid case on one individual. And when you ask that question, he was like, yeah, this would be a very difficult case. And it was very sloppy. The crime itself was very sloppy. It was very effective in the end, but super sloppy. And that's frightening to think that someone can go into a crime like this intending to do one thing, and the way Matt says it, it was either one thing, like he was either going to rape her or he was going to murder her and rape her, vice versa. But what ended up happening was just unforeseen. If he didn't leave that DNA, it would be a very difficult case, which is just astounding.
Absolutely. And I know we referenced that Kohberger was a criminology student, and he had some intentionality in trying to get away with the crime by shutting his phone off. I wonder, and I didn't ask Matt during the conversation, but I wonder if going across state lines was part of Kohberger's plan to try and get away with it. But obviously it didn't work because he was caught. But additionally, it may have backfired because it got the FBI in on the case, that may not have been working on the case otherwise, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, it feels like Kohberger was just right below being like very smart about this. Like his intentions were very close to trying to get away with a perfect murder, but it just was maybe 5 yards short of the goal line. That whole thing, if he intended to go over state lines to do this, really didn't have much of an effect. Not only did it not, like you said, it only brought in federal authorities. And then the trash that he threw out in a neighbor's yard. If you understand it up to the point where you're going to deposit trash in a receptacle that's not in front of your home, go many, many miles away. Don't go across the street or whatever. I mean, you are aware that people have security cameras, ring cameras, and I'm just saying this number, I'm not sure, but 30 feet away is not doing you much good. It's actually, as Matt said, that is like a slam dunk. It's so suspicious.
Yeah. Yeah, and I liked when Matt said that he would bet on them returning a guilty verdict and probably go for the death penalty as well. And what do you think? You think Kohberger? I know we're months away from the trial still, but based on what Matt said, it seems to me like I think Matt's right. I think this might be a death penalty.
I think so too. I don't see a crime that would be committed that would be much worse that you would consider the death penalty for. Like, if this doesn't get the death penalty, what does it take to get the death penalty? I mean, you can appeal it. You can, take it right down to the wire, but I just don't understand what would have to be worse than this. Like, you're setting a really precarious bar if you say this is a life sentence or you put a term on it.
Yeah, and my final comment here, I was a little surprised at how upset that Matt got about them demolishing the house. And after listening to his reasons why, I understand. But I was surprised that he had such a strong opinion on that.
Yeah, and he even brought up the financial aspect of it. It's not like they tore it down to put up other facilities that could house students or that they could have some sort of economic impact to the community. They're putting in a park with probably a memorial to the 4 individuals. But again, why would you do it now? Why wouldn't you wait until everything's settled and you can approach it in a more compassionate manner at all, if you wanted to do that at all? I mean, there's so many other ways where you can give back or try to heal the community.
All right, everybody. Thanks a lot for listening here today. We really appreciate it. Make sure you pick up Matt Murphy's book, The Book of Murder. It truly is excellent. You won't be disappointed. And while you're out there, please follow us on social media at Missing CSM.